Hello, today is March 29th, the fifth Sunday in Lent, or as it would be traditionally called, Passion Sunday. And I bring up Passion Sunday because you might have noticed if you watched our live streaming Mass today, or if you watched live streaming Mass from somewhere else, or a videotaped Mass somewhere else, you may have noticed that the statues and the crucifix were covered with cloths today. And because maybe some of us are watching Masses that are not from our own parishes, or some of us, like at St. Vincent de Paul, where in the past we normally haven't veiled the statues and the images in the church, we haven't normally done that. So even if you're a parishioner at St. Vincent de Paul, you might not have noticed that before. And so today you might be wondering, why are they doing that? What is the deal with that? Even behind me, I'm recording this in the chapel. And if you remember last week, I recorded a video in front of the image of Christ the King, and that's the image of Christ the King behind me, but covered with a purple cloth. And so you might be wondering, why is that? Why do they do that? Why do they do that starting today? And the reason why, it goes back, way back to like so much of our faith, so much of our, not just our faith, the substance of our faith, that of course goes back to Christ, who is the fullness of revelation, but so many of the practices of our faith go all the way back hundreds and hundreds, if not over 1,000 years. And so some of the, like I say, the expressions of our faith, and this is one of those that goes back way, way, way back in our history, even to the early Middle Ages. And it goes back to the custom that sometimes in those early days, even more than just the last 2 weeks of Lent, sometimes during all of Lent, everything would be covered up, everything. There was even a tradition whereby the entire altar would be covered with a cloth, so nobody could see the altar, nobody could see what was going on during the Mass. And so, but the reason why we have it now, in the whole idea, you can tell I'm not scripted when I do these. But the reason why we do this, it goes back to the idea of fasting. It goes back to this idea that during Lent, we in a sense deprive ourselves of things that we otherwise could legitimately enjoy. We don't say, I'm going to fast from, I'm going to give up gossip, or I'm going to fast from or give up something otherwise that's sinful. What we do when we fast, when we sacrifice, from things that are legitimately acceptable, even legitimately good for us, so that by depriving ourselves, we can long more for the coming of Christ. And so one of the things that we tend to like as human beings, and I know I do too, you've seen from all of the different places around the rectory, around the office that we've been recording these, you see a lot of kind of art, a lot of beautiful images, and those things are good, and those things are not only are they good, but they're very often helpful to us in our seeking for salvation. They remind us, in every room in the rectory has a crucifix in it to remind us, no matter where we go, of the sacrifice of Christ and the love of Jesus Christ. I recommend in your own homes, every room in your own home should have a crucifix or a cross to remind you always, no matter what you're doing, whether you're relaxing, whether you're eating, whether you're about to go to sleep, whatever it is that you're doing in your home, cooking dinner, whatever it is, to remind you of the love of Christ and remind you of the sacrifice of Christ and the fact that Christ is always with you. But there's this idea, though, that in depriving ourselves of these things, I love the painting that's behind me. Like I say, you can go back to the other video and look at it. It's a very nice painting. It's a kind of late medieval, early Renaissance Dutch painting of Christ the King, surrounded by singing angels and everything. It's a wonderful painting. It's beautiful. But right now, I'm depriving myself of seeing this, of that edification. And the idea is that if we have these things normally, which is why we should have them normally, but we deprive ourselves of them occasionally, especially during this time, during these last 2 weeks of Lent, it will make us long for it even more. The deprivation of that image of Christ will remind us to seek not just the beauty of the painting, not just the beauty of the image, but seek the beauty of the real Christ, of the true Christ, the Christ that image, that painting represents, the true glory of God. It's typically done in the last 2 Sundays of Lent, so beginning today and through and through Good Friday, where the crucifix would be uncovered, and then on Holy Saturday at the Easter Vigil, all of the images will once again be uncovered, so that once again, we're surrounded by that beauty, surrounded by that glory of God. But it's traditionally done in the last 2 weeks of Lent, because before the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, the fifth Sunday of Lent was known as Passion Sunday. Because the readings began the cycle of the Passion of Jesus. And so back then, or if you go to the extraordinary form of the Mass now, because it's hard to say back then because it's still going on, what would have been read would have been from John's Gospel, chapter 12, 10 through 36. And so if you were following a Novus Ordo Mass today, you might remember that the reading was from John's Gospel, the chapter before chapter 11, with the raising of Lazarus from the dead. So today's Gospel in those days, in the extraordinary form now, the Gospel began, the chief priests plotted to kill Lazarus also, too, because many of the Jews were turning away in believing in Jesus because of him. So we see the aftermath, the ramifications of the gospel that we heard today. That many people were converting, and I talked about that in my homily today. Many converted, but many didn't. And many saw people converting because of Lazarus and said, all right, we'll kill Lazarus too. We'll get that Jesus, and we'll get that Lazarus. And what we get in that section from John's gospel is immediately after that, we have, on the next day, the great crowd had come to the feast and had heard Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. They took out palm branches and went out to meet him and crying out. And so we have the Palm Sunday reading, again, which is Jesus' entry into Jerusalem and the beginning of his passion. And so it begins this heightened part in our celebration of Lent, a heightened time these last 2 weeks where we deprive ourselves even further, we do greater and greater penances. Also, in addition to that, you'll notice that if you pay close attention to the weekday Mass readings, that the preface of the Mass changes as well, even now in the current Mass that we celebrate. The preface changes, and you might notice an air of greater urgency to prepare for the coming of Christ. And another one of the reasons why, and it has this kind of poetic beauty that you find very often in the liturgy, that at the end of that reading that we would have read today, so after Jesus' triumphal entry in Jerusalem, he begins to speak of his hour coming, of that preparation that he's undergoing as well to experience his passion. And the reading ends with this: "The light will be among you only a little while. Walk while you have the light, so that darkness may not overcome you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become children of the light." After he had said this, Jesus left and hid from them. The veiling also calls to mind that Jesus going into that seclusion. It goes of Jesus in a sense, drawing to a close what we might call his public ministry and preparing for his passion. So the veiling of the images also focuses us on this singular topic, on the singular focus, the singular thing that we're looking at of preparing for the passion of Jesus. Jesus is, in a sense, maybe in our lives sometimes it does seem as though Jesus is hidden from us. The veiling of the images reminds us of that feeling. But nevertheless, also the presence of Jesus in the tabernacle and the knowledge of the love of God reminds us that even though Jesus might seem hidden at times, he's not truly absent from us. He's not truly gone away. Just the veil has maybe been drawn. We might not experience it as much. But Jesus is truly there. Jesus truly remains. And Jesus is always there to save us from our sins, to give us that pure and lasting joy. And so in these last 2 weeks of Lent, I know, like I say, it's difficult. I know it's difficult not to be here at Mass. I know it's difficult not to be here in a community of believers. But remember, it's still the last 2 weeks of Lent. Remember to draw your focus, to draw your energy back to God. And know that even though it might seem now, especially with that inability to attend Mass publicly, it might seem as though Jesus is veiled and hidden from you. Know that he's not hidden from you. And Jesus is always here with us, loving us, to save his people. Thank you.